All our security, all our economy, every single part of it depends on the security that defence provides. That's what the SDR set out very clearly. The era of expeditionary warfare is over. We need to be ready to fight against a peer adversary. If we get this right, everyone wins, and the person who loses is the guy sitting in the Kremlin.
Welcome back to Season 3 of Defence Talk, Securing a Key Advantage, a podcast brought to you by the Council on Geostrategy in partnership with trade association ADS Group and sponsored by industry powerhouse BAE Systems. I'm Victoria Starek-Summerlin, and I'm joined today by my co-host, journalist and author, Paul Mason.
It's great to be here, Victoria, as always. And we often talk about defence and defence industry in terms of cost. How much do we want the MOD to spend? When's this programme coming? How much is it going to overspill? But today we're going to flip that on its head, and we're going to talk about the economic value of defence in terms of deterrence, in terms of growth, in terms of growing the skills base of the UK.
And to discuss all of this, we are absolutely delighted and honoured to be joined by
Defence Minister, and I'm going to give you your full title, Minister of Defence Readiness and Industry. Luke Pollard MP is in addition to his ministerial role, the MP for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport, which of course is the biggest naval base in Europe and a major factor in UK defence. So welcome, Luke.
Thank you.
As you know, at the Council on Geostrategy, we love to talk about the geostrategic landscape. And I feel maybe just to set the scene a bit for our conversation this afternoon, what are the key geostrategic challenges in your view that are informing the way how you approach defence of the United Kingdom and how you prioritise what we should be investing in?
Well, it's great to be here. It's my favourite two people in defence around one table. This is good. Well, look, I think the world is a more dangerous place. And it sounds such an obvious statement. But if we believe that to be true, and I do, we've got to do something different. That's why, as a new government coming in July 24, we commissioned the Strategic Defence Review within days. That sets out a pretty accurate threat picture, greater global instability, more revisionist powers, a very clear sense of Russian threat to the United Kingdom and our allies, a requirement to learn from what's happening in Ukraine. Although we wouldn't fight in the same way as Ukraine, clearly the way that battlefield technologies is changing has fundamental implications for how a leading NATO power like the UK prepares for conflict and deters it. But also, how do we make defence a genuine engine for growth? Now, I love that phrase because it's not only a good soundbite that I have to use frequently, but it's also true. And we haven't, I think, over a very long period of time as a country, taken the time to explain to the wider public, to the rest of government, that investing in defence creates good, well-paid, unionised jobs, 67% of those jobs outside London and the South East, a huge opportunity for giving young people really good careers, really a huge opportunity to bring on loads of firms that aren't currently defence industry in the way that they may have traditionally viewed it, but to make a stronger, more resilient Britain. Now, that is an argument that, as the Minister responsible for buying stuff for the MOD and the Minister responsible for getting us ready for a conflict against a peer adversary, that's a huge challenge. And I take the basic starting point that we can't tweak our way out of this. This is not something that simply adjusting a policy ever so slightly is going to deliver. And that's why we have a bold defence industrial strategy that says buy more from British companies, build increased resilience, increased sovereignty, secure our supply chains, as well as a forthcoming defence investment plan that will detail what we're spending an increasing defence budget on. Because I can't deter Putin with kind of like phantom capabilities or with spreadsheets or press releases. We can only do that with genuine capabilities, a more resilient country, and importantly, more investment in our men and women that focus on the front line, but an industrial base that sits behind it that is always on, that's fired up, that's growing, that's supporting UK and our allies. That's a big job. But taken together, that is how you deter aggression. That's how we deter Putin from looking over the NATO boundary and thinking, I could take one of those Baltic states, or I could interfere with one of your cables. That's what we've got to do to be strong.
And Minister, it says here on my question list, the government has spoken about a transition to wartime industrial footing by 2027. But I've got a kind of even more fundamental question. Do we know, given the need for a hybrid navy, the iterations that, for example, Ukraine drone warfare is going through, do we even know what a wartime industrial footing would look like for the United Kingdom?
It's a fair challenge. I think lots of people that have been around defence for quite some time have told themselves this lie that when it's needed, industry will turn itself on. And then we'll have increased production, we'll have more capital investment going into production lines, we'll see more output. We told ourselves that fib right throughout the kind of expeditionary warfare period, where we weren't investing in core capabilities, we were investing in capabilities that our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan needed. We told ourselves that fib when Putin first invaded Ukraine. We certainly told ourselves that fib after the full-scale invasion. I just don't accept it anymore. Like, that's why we've got a more interventionist defence industrial strategy than we've had for a very long time. It's why we are very clear about what government can bring to the party. That is a clear demand signal. That's what the DIP, our 10-year plan, will set out. This is what we're buying. That for the very first time in our industrial strategy, we're saying we, the MOD, will invest in skills. Because we know to make this work, we're going to need more people, certainly in crunch areas. That's why we've created Defence Technical Excellence colleges around the country. That's why we've got more as part of our growth deal with Scotland and in Wales. And although they might be called something ever so slightly different for the joys of Northern Ireland politics, a similar type of opportunity for people in Northern Ireland to get a good, decent, well-paid job in defence. But I think to get that, we have to change the relationship between government and industry. And if I see that just in the last, say, few months, where the MOD stood up Task Force Sabre, which is our Middle East-facing response to Iranian reckless aggression against our friends, our allies, and our own bases there. That is saying to industry, if you build it, we'll buy it. This is what our friends need. This is what we need. We'll cut through the procurement delays that still exist in the system. I'm very frustrated. We're making good progress about hacking it down, but there's still more to do. And that uses the permissions that we have for Ukraine. Taken together, that means we can get more kit to the front line faster. That is that spirit and that culture that I want applied to procurement for the UK armed forces. Now, I couldn't buy a submarine or a frigate using the same permissions we use for Ukraine. I think we all know that. But I can buy a lot more than we're doing at the moment. And that is the journey that I want us to be on, because we've got an outstanding defence industry. We've got really good big primes. We've got good foreign investment, bringing global expertise and IP into the UK. And we've got an SME sector that I think, with a bit more love and support, could be world leading in more sectors than they currently already are. Now, that's a huge growth opportunity for us.
Can I just come in there? Because in the defence industrial strategy, there is this second tier, isn't there? The modular, spirally developed, often very high technology stuff. It could be a sensor, it could be an effector. When are we going to see the MOD starting to buy that kind of stuff? So it's not just a supply of an off-the-shelf drone because we need it.
Yeah.
Where are you with that? Because that's, in many ways, for the SMEs and the high-tech companies in British defence industry, that's the big opportunity.
Yeah. So we already are. And if I give you an example of the hybrid navy. So as Victoria set out, I represent Devonport. I'm proud to come from a naval family. I'm a complete Navy nerd on this stuff. And the change to say the Royal Navy will be uncrewed as standard, crewed where necessary, means that we will have more ships in the Royal Navy. We'll have more platforms in the Royal Navy, just most of them won't have people on board. They'll still need sailors and engineers and more investment in bases. But where we're looking at, say, bringing on autonomous and uncrewed platforms that will sail alongside our crewed platforms, well, they'll not be a product I buy off the shelf and keep for 30 years and then eventually retire, which is how we've done defence procurement for far too long. There'll be a platform deliberately designed to be spiral developed, to have new tech added to it. To a certain extent, to do that, you've got to kind of like have a understanding about open architecture. You've got to have an understanding about how you have contracting frameworks and servicing that allows the addition of tech, and in fact actually starts with the fundamental agreement between the operator, the Navy, and the industrial partners. We are going to add more stuff to this. We're going to grow it. And sometimes we might break it to the point where we need to replace it. That's okay, because at the moment, our Navy is set up to get every single asset we send out to come home. I don't want to lose any ships. But in a hybrid Navy sense, we'll have both consumable assets, stuff that we will use and probably not get back, attritable assets, stuff we would like to come back, but if it doesn't, we understand why, and assets like crewed platforms where we must protect it, move it further back from the front line with more weapon systems sensors that are more distance facing, with able to reach further than they can today. Now that's a fundamental change in how the Navy works. It's a change in our doctrine, but it's one that our allies want to buy into. It will increase our lethality, it will increase our deterrent capability, and it will create more good jobs. Now I think that's a win-win-win for all of us, but to do that, you've got to start slaughtering some sacred cows. And one of those, I mean, we've spoken about this before, the frustration I get where people say we need 19 frigates and destroyers. Why? Why not 18? Why not 20? We've settled on this magic number that we are wedded to. I want to see increased capabilities. They will come in different forms, different shapes and sizes. I want to see a bigger Royal Navy, more platforms. That's what a hybrid Navy will deliver, and it will deliver a greater punch than we have today.
So how do we manage the priorities between the needs of imminent security risks and threats and, well, the wars that are happening around the world, and that long-term thinking, potential threats that we feel we might be encountering in a decade or two?
It's a really big challenge, and I think it's a challenge that the MOD has not faced in this way for a very long time. So it's a challenge to how our systems are built, which is sometimes for the immediate. But we know that we've got a warfighting headmark that we need to be ready to, in theory, be able to deter or defeat, if required, a peer adversary. We can see what Russia in particular are doing with our friends in Ukraine. We can see the tactics they're using, the technology they're applying. We can see how it's not just a one set of equipment. It's a high-low mid-mix. And the phrase high-low mix is used quite frequently. I don't like it because it misses out this really important category of technologies that will use high-end tech but applied in a mid-market type of way. Now, we'll need both exquisite Gucci capabilities with precision strike, with the ability to deliver effect in a really novel way, and we'll need mass. And so we have a challenge against all of that, and we have a challenge of restocking our stockpiles immediately, because I think I'm not allowed to talk about how many missiles or shells we have in our stockpile, because that's understandably classified, but it's pretty obvious that we inherited a situation where it had been emptied out, underinvested in for some time. Much of that was given to our friends in Ukraine, which we support. But now we've been left with the challenge of refilling it. So we have to invest immediately in restocking our supplies. So in the event of us being asked to use those weapon systems, we have the ability to do so. So could we fight tonight against Russia or any other adversary? Yes, we could. Would we fight stronger, better tomorrow, the week after, the month after, with the investments we're making? Yes. And that is the kind of like competing pressures of immediate support to refill the stockpiles, to undo the hollowing out that we inherited, and then invest in the technologies we need. Now, some of those technologies we've seen are unsuitable for the threats we're facing. Some of them don't learn the lessons from Ukraine. Some of them are far too wedded to a construct that doesn't reflect autonomous threats, autonomous opportunities, drones. And so it does require a different type of thinking. So that's why we haven't just spat out an easy defence investment plan. It'd be quite easy just to like recycle the kind of fiction that was the last government's equipment plan. But we're going through line by line, we're going through capability by capability, deliberately challenging doctrine, challenging thinking, and what we're getting in that process is not only a much better understanding of the reality of MOD budgets, the reality of MOD culture that says, we'll tell you how much it costs now, but we might not include the servicing or the support, because that would make it quite expensive and I probably wouldn't get that. Or if I pretend I can buy X amount and then all these extra costs come in, all we do is just nibble away the numbers. But that culture is not suitable to get us to warfighting readiness. And for me, the Defence Investment Plan isn't a document. It's a cultural reset. It is a way of getting our forces and the Ministry of Defence apparatus in the mindset of warfighting readiness, because that's what the SDR set out very clearly. The era of expeditionary warfare is over. We need to be ready to fight against a peer adversary. Now, that's a big challenge. It's a big mindset shift for defence. But because it is a big challenge, we've now been resourced accordingly. We have an increasing defence budget, and there's not a single person in uniform no admiral, general, or air marshal who has ever served in the armed forces with a decade ahead of rising defence spending. That's where we are today. Now, I love the debate about how much we should spend and what we should spend it on. That's a healthy debate for us to have as a democracy. But you can't do that without an understanding that the threats we face are increasing and that the brilliant men and women of our armed forces deserve better equipment, they deserve better housing, they deserve decent pay, the things that were neglected over the last decade. We're changing all of that, but we can't spin on a dime. We can't get to exactly where I want to be tomorrow, but tomorrow I want us to be better than where we are today. And I want that relentless sense of improvement to be kind of like influenced by the reality. Reality of what we see on our screens, the reality of the threat that's increasing, the reality that more allies are looking to Britain than they have been for a very long time for international leadership.
Minister, just maybe a cheeky question about defence spending and the percentage points here. So, of course, NATO summit is coming up in Ankara this time around. And I looked recently at the stats. So I think back in 2022, we were the third largest defence spender within the alliance. I think last year in May, we were at number 10, and now we are somewhere at around number 12. So how do we actually speed up the process of increasing that defence spending as part of, well, GDP, of course, according to NATO guidelines, to ensure that we maintain that leadership and ability to lead within NATO? Because the numbers where we currently are in that table, it doesn't look great.
Yeah, and if you measure it purely on GDP percentage, then you get a different answer than if you measure how many actual pounds or equivalent dollars, equivalent euros are you spending. So we are still one of the biggest cash spenders on defence in NATO. We will remain that biggest cash spender, but where we're increasing defence spending, so on current plans, we get to 2.5% of GDP in April 2027, April next year. Well, that's the level we left office in 2010. The coalition, the Tories and Lib Dems, cut defence spending, and they haven't increased it to 2.5% in any one of their 14 years. That gets us back to there. It's 3% in the next parliament, 3.5% by 2035, hitting the NATO standard. Now, the PM's been pretty clear on this, which has been helpful. He wants us to spend more and go faster. That's pretty clear in my mind. The Defence Investment Plan will start setting out what the spend is, where's the profiling of spend, what you spend in roughly which period. But I do know that the debate within NATO, if you have it on just cash or just percentage, which, now we've got agreement for everyone getting to 3.5%. I think it's a harder debate on that. That's a good stick to hit people with, but I want it to be about warfighting readiness. So we could spend loads of money on defence. If I'm not interoperable with our allies, if I'm not deployable, if I don't have the war stocks to sustain myself in the field or to sustain myself in battle, well, whatever percent I spend on of GDP is irrelevant. And I think to a certain extent of this debate, yes, of course GDP spend's important. And there'll be many people that need to have that debate. And that's right to have. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm saying with the context we are in today, it is right that a minister with the portfolio that I have on readiness, I want to have a basket of measures that says, this is what warfighting readiness looks like across NATO. Because we will not fight on our own in the European theatre, North Atlantic theatre. We'll fight with our friends, with our allies. So our stuff's got to work with our friends. And, when you look at the examples at the moment of 155 shells not fitting in artillery, that in theory, other nations have, that we have, that doesn't work. So it's the same size ammunition, in theory the same gun barrel, but it doesn't work. Now, it's a huge problem for Ukraine, you can see at the moment. People donating kit and equipment that it's not interoperable. But for me, the warfighting readiness doesn't mean interoperability. It means interchangeability. It means our P-8 maritime patrol aircraft might take off from Lossiemouth, might land in Iceland or in Germany or in Denmark or in Norway. Well, when they land, they need to be able to take sonar buoys and torpedoes on. Well, if all our sonar buoys and torpedoes are different, if the launcher systems on the same aircraft don't work with others' capability, well, that's not adding deterrence. And I think part of the challenge we've got is, yes, there's some headline stats and numbers. Absolutely right, we have that. We're increasing defence spending. I'm pretty happy. There is a route for us to increase it. That's good. What we spend it on, I think is a debate that we need to spend more time on and make sure that what we spend on is genuinely adding to the lethality and deterrence of NATO forces.
Let's come to that, Luke Pollard, because it's a nice segue into the question of technological innovation versus mass now. And so we're recording this on a day where the UK has just placed close to £1 billion to buy 155mm howitzer that is remote controlled, RCH 155, and it sits on a boxer, so it's interoperable, hopefully, with, and even maybe interchangeable with some of our allies. But you've got 3.1 billion ring-fenced per year to develop AI, cyber, quantum capabilities. These are figures from the Defence Industrial Strategy. 6 billion over 10 years for munitions. So all right, it's double, but in actual fact, it's less per year. And philosophically, where is the MOD's emphasis? Because you can't do everything, you have to choose. You defend one place, you attack somewhere else. So where is the emphasis? Is it on the technological frontier, or are we just backfilling mass? What in your mind is the most important to do?
So I like and rather than or in politics, because I think the simplicity that sound bites force on politicians misses the detail. And it sounds like a horrendous political answer. I'm sure your viewers will be going, oh no, he's not going to answer this properly. Well, what do I want? I want immediate filling of our stockpiles. That's why we've made decisions to replace capabilities that we inherited that are gapped. RCH 155 being a good example. The previous platform, the AS90, I've seen them in Ukraine myself. They're working superbly, but they're in Ukraine. They're not in the UK, or they're not in Estonia with our forward land forces. RCH 155 is a huge uplift. It can be crewed by 2 soldiers. It can fire 8 rounds a minute and on the move. Now, that is a massive capability upgrade from the AS90. And it's right that we replace and upgrade those capabilities. I want to see more capabilities that allow us to increase our deterrence in the short term, but we shouldn't do that at the expense of longer term programs. Now, some of those longer term programs develop some of the cutting edge capabilities, especially when we're looking at complex weapons, hypersonics, the kind of weapon systems that creates genuine deterrence in the mind of our adversaries. But if you did one or the other, you're getting it wrong. It's got to be that mix. And that's why, for me, I argue for all domain warfare. I don't argue for one domain over the other. Look, I'm a Navy brat, so clearly I have an affinity for what the Navy and the Marines do. But I know that no naval operation happens without space and cyber, without land and air, right? So that is the case across all our forces. So how we approach these things has to be done in a different way. And the DIP will set out those choices that we're making, the difficult choices about where we invest, what we're looking at, and how do we make sure that when we said that we are delivering a NATO first policy, what are the NATO missions that we're being asked to resource against? And how do we make sure we've got the kit and equipment, the industrial base and the people, the skills, to make sure that when required, we can deliver our obligation to NATO?
Minister, some of our listeners represent, of course, defence industry and both SMEs and also defence primes. And I know that you've been a strong advocate of investing more into the vibrant SME community that we've got in the UK defence. Now, I think sometimes some of those SMEs, they face a big challenge when it comes to also the culture in Whitehall in terms of the speed of the process. So when you are a startup or an SME, of course, what really matters is the cash flow and the ability to plan at least midterm to succeed, and ideally long-term as well. And sometimes what they come across is that from the moment they pitch to the moment they sign a contract, it might take a year or so. And it exhausts, for a startup, for example, it exhausts the vast majority of the available financial resources they've got over the course of 12 to 18 months. How do we overcome this challenge to continue to nurture that SME community that we've got in the UK?
Yeah. First of all, we recognise it's real. Secondly, we need to reduce the time of procurement, increase the speed. So we've set in the Defence Industrial Strategy targets that 2-year procurement should take 1 year, 1 year should take 6 months, 1 year should take less. That's a big aspiration. Well, that means we've got to take a bit more risk in that process. It means we've got to get rid of some of the stupid rules that get in the way of faster procurement, but it also means about how we finance some of those contracts. We've got to give greater understanding about the difficulty, especially for SMEs, to be able to access market. Now, to do that, I think there's a problem with SMEs being able to find out there's a contract going at all. That's why we've created the Defence Office Small Business Growth, a front door for SMEs to be able to go to Defence to be able to get the advice. I think there's more I want to do about looking at the security clearances that are required, which can put folks off. The cyber essentials, which is a business cost. Now, it's absolutely right we secure our supply chain, right? But when Defence and some of our adjacent departments that have similar national security roles have ever so slightly different requirements, that's just adding cost. And that is like boxing SMEs into a particular area. But we are making progress about reforming procurement. So, today, the headlines in the paper may be talking about RCH 155. It's got a great image of a vehicle shooting a shell out. That's a good image. We've also announced today changes to the single source regulation regime that with our intention to lift the threshold of single sourcing where the regime kicks in from 3 million to 25 million. Well, that takes out nearly every single SME from the regulatory burden of this system. Now, that's a huge boost to small businesses. Now, I want to go through all our procurement and do exactly the same of that. Now, that's changing a culture. And the last lot, bless them, at the end of 14 years, they didn't have the ability to do this because they defended a broken system for far too long. I have no interest in defending a broken system. I have an interest in changing the one we've inherited, the one we're trying to speed up. Now, I mentioned stupid rules earlier. Since we launched the Get Rid of Stupid Rules consultation, and it took me a while to get agreement from the department to call it that.
Title?
It is. It absolutely is. We've been able to identify those annoying things that get in the way. If our mission is warfighting readiness, the corollary of that is anything that gets in the way of us delivering readiness is something we need to remove. Now, I don't think it should be for a minister or a general or an admiral to be going through procurement pages like that and saying, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that. I want to create a culture within the MOD where those folks that work at Abbey Wood in our procurement arm, those folks that are working in the National Armament Directors Group, those people on the front line are empowered to be able to make changes themselves because all the incentives in the MOD have been pointing against that. And so when SMEs have been saying we've got a problem with kind of like, early stage funding, and yes, we can compete, we can win, but the procurement process basically means we've exhausted our capital and we might not be here by the time we've actually come to buy it. Well, that's bad for defence, it's bad for the taxpayer, it's bad for our capabilities. So we're looking to change those and, the work of the small businesses that we have now embedded in defence. We have small businesses that sit on the Defence Industrial Joint Council, which is our main source of engagement with the private sector. Their challenge that we've just had on the regulatory sprints and the procurement sprints that we've been doing with them, they've come up with recommendations. We've accepted nearly all of them and we're implementing them because this is a win-win situation. And I think for me, the straight line to warfighting readiness just basically cuts through so much crap.
Now, as we move to warfighting readiness, what role is there for defence primes?
So a big role. We need big system integrators. We need big primes producing the high-level R&D, the bringing together of incredible companies into building our platforms. I want to see the UK being a place where more foreign primes invest, but I want to see us being honest with the big primes about what we need from them. In return for a very clear demand signal, I want big primes to invest in skills. Now, some are good at this already, some are perhaps less good at this already, because one of the big obstacles we have to delivering on time good value projects is not only the procurement system, we're changing that, but it's the fact that the big companies don't have the skills to deliver what they're signing up for. And then the cost of providing those skills falls on the taxpayer. Well, we've got to lift the floor and the aspirations. That means more investment in apprenticeships. DTECs will help this. I'm very proud to be part of a government that has discovered and loves further education. It's been ignored by government for the last 15 years. We've now got a government that recognises that FE colleges in all their different forms across the UK are vital for our national security. But we also need graduate level, and we need reskilling of people that have worked in a certain type of trade for many years. Technology has changed that trade, and we need to reskill them using their experience to apply their skills in a more modern setting. Now, that's a huge investment, and primes are absolutely right to be able to lead that charge. But for me, it's not just primes, it's neo-primes, it's the scale-up companies. So the Defence Industrial Strategy set out our aspiration to have more defence unicorns, small companies that grow big and scale up. Now, I want them to scale up and stay. Whereas in the past, we had a bit more laissez-faire. Scale up, be bought by a big American company, have an exit strategy for your shareholders, tick, tick, tick. Well, I want people to absolutely benefit from their energy and their industry, but I want them to stay invested in the UK. I want us to have more UK headquartered firms. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want US primes here. Absolutely not. Really keen to have more foreign direct investment into the UK, but it means I want to grow more British companies here as well.
Luke Pollard, following on from that, all British defence capital has an access to capital problem. Whether you're a prime dealing with the city, and we're still dealing with the aftermath of ESG, but it's not just that. The Basel regulations, the general risk aversion of big capital is a thing that everyone experiences. And down, whether it's a startup or an established SME, always the first thing you're meeting is, I can't get capital. I can't. Some can't even get a bank account. What is the MOD doing? Because I think there is a lot going on at the very granular level to try and sort of, I use the analogy, we need a plug of capital into a socket of defence industrial capability.
Yep.
How are you making the two things match?
So, it's a fair challenge. So there's a huge amount of focus on the Defence Investment Plan, quite correctly. For me, one of the documents that follows that, the Defence Finance and Investment Strategy, the DFIS.
Yep.
Well, that will deal with everything from debanking, because it is true and is unacceptable that our big high street banks that on one side of their business are saying to defence, we want to invest more in defence, we want to understand your demand signal so we can resource against it. And on the other side of their business are debanking brilliant British SMEs. Well, that doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for the Treasury. So there's progress we're going to make on that. But at the same time, the work that's been going on looking at the different forms of capital flows we can bring into the market, be that venture capital, patient capital, sovereign capital, is being informed by work of brilliant private sector entrepreneurs. Kerry Baldwin helps co-chair our Defence Investor Advisory Group. That's now been put on a permanent footing because in its 6 months of operation, it's produced enormous amounts of value and insight already. I want us to be clear about, though, what do we need to do as defence to create more investable propositions for private capital to be able to access? Now, that hasn't been something that defence has been very good at, if we're speaking honestly about it. So where's those opportunities to bring in private capital, to get capabilities early, to support the scale-up of firms that delivers national security benefits? Now, I think there's a huge amount of opportunities here, and it starts with proper engagement with capital markets, proper engagement that says, yeah, we'll build investable products. And that starts with us saying, yeah, we'll work with firms to bring private capital to the market. It is a key part of our defence industrial strategy. We're not going to shy away from that. But equally, there are things the state should do, there's things that defence should do, and where we should do it, we will do it.
People watching this who are in the industry would say, well, the first thing we need is a contract. There's nothing better to be able to take to an investor is 300 million on this in this place over 10 years. And I think that's why the frustration is there of the non-appearance of the dip, isn't it? Certainly among the businesses we.
So I can see that, but I can also see the amount of contracts we're still signing. So 1,200 contracts since the general election, like really big interventionist contracts with firms, precisely that. So if you think about the contract we announced only a few weeks ago now with Cambridge Aerospace to buy their Skyhammer missile, it's something I saw being tested in Jordan only a few weeks ago. Well, that's a huge vote of confidence in a veteran-led British startup. That's enabled them to be able to concentrate the minds of investors, to grow the value of the firm, bringing more investment, bringing more capabilities faster. Well, I want to see that more often. And that is a different role excuse me, because in the past, defence has been looking at big primes for that type of innovation. Well, I still look to big primes for that innovation, but I'm aware that many of them like wrapping it with a contractual framework first. I want to, in the changes we're making to our procurement, I want to incentivise people to invest their own money in products and have that reflected in what we will buy, encouraging more risk taking from the private sector. But I also think there's amazing talent in our SME sector. Huge opportunity there.
So I'm keen to talk about the prosperity multiplier, where every pound invested, let's say, into a frigate program, as an example, also creates high-skilled jobs and other benefits. So I think probably the biggest challenge that we face when we're having this defence conversation with our society is also to explain not only what it brings to us when it comes to securing our national advantage in our defence, but also what does it bring in practice in terms of economic benefits and development and positive things.
For too long, defence has discouraged the firms that work for us from telling a story about what they're doing. Now, I don't want firms, big or small, giving away the terminal velocity of the missiles they're making, but I do want them to say, we're contracting this many SMEs in our area. We're hiring this many graduates and this many apprentices. That's a story that we need to incentivise more, because if we are to be true to our belief that defence is an engine for growth, well, I can't just say it. It can't just be a thing that's said by a handful of ministers. It needs to be something that whatever contract, whatever military activity we're undertaking anywhere in the UK, you better see the local benefits from doing so. And we've got a really good story to tell here. So this isn't like, some spin doctor somewhere has invented a phrase and gone, I'll just keep saying this. It's true. It's real in all our communities. And, if I look at, say, the opportunities that come from expanding apprenticeships on the Clyde, as an example, where BAE Systems are building the Type 26, the work that I see, the opportunities for those young people, those young Scots to get a decent job that will give them amazing wages for the rest of their career, well, that changes lives. And in the military, we're used to a certain type of argument around joining the army massively improves your prospects. Well, we can make this case for people in uniform. We just haven't made it for anyone in industry. And that, I think, is a collective team effort to make that. And I think if we are better at arguing that defence spending in our communities produces benefit for the local community as well as for our national security, we'll be more likely to get more of it. And we'll be more likely to have a debate that concentrates on how do we spend it well.
Do you think we are good at messaging this to the wider society, or can we still improve?
No. Yes, is the answer to those two questions. And so
how do we improve then?
Well, I think for lots of the stuff I've spoken about today, it's about a culture change. It's about us being proud of the work we do, being unapologetic for the support we're providing for our friends, our allies, and for the UK, and for being determined that increasing defence spending must deliver results for the UK, for UK taxpayers. Because especially if we're spending more on defence, we're not spending it on something else. Now, I don't believe that argument, that it's just take from one, give to the other. I believe that defence and the growth rate we're seeing in defence provides more opportunity for exports. If you think about the huge success of the Type 26 export campaign to Norway, well, that keeps shipbuilding on the Clyde for another 15 years. Now, I hope other nations look to the Type 31 and the benefits that will bring, not just for a brilliant workhorse vessel built with autonomy in mind, but also the benefits for the communities around Rosyth and the supply chain. So I think we have to be less British about telling the story. And keep the secret stuff secret, but tell a story about the things that people want to hear about. And in return, that builds pride back in our communities. Because in many of these cases, these deeply industrial communities, they're very proud communities. I represent one. We don't always show that pride, but we need to restore pride. And if we have more pride in our industrial base, more recognition for the amazing work our forces do, well, I think we become stronger, more cohesive as a community at the same time.
No, absolutely.
I mean, On that, I mean, it's a perfect opportunity while we've got you to ask you about the Southwest England. Give it. You're there. You're an MP for there. You've had recent. We've had the Helsing miniature submarine factory. Let's call it that. Tell us what's going right. What needs to go better.
Well,
and you've got a DTEC as well.
We have, yeah. So the Southwest has got, in fact, got two in the Southwest actually.
Yeovil
and in Plymouth. Well, the Southwest has 96,000 defence jobs. It's the largest of any part of the world, and that's because of the capabilities that we have based in the Southwest. We've got a story that I think in the Southwest is more comfortable with talking about defence. There's more presence in a greater area, and kind of like in Plymouth, everyone knows someone who works in the dockyard. So it's not an alien concept. But for me, it's an area where increasing defence spending is more visible in the jobs it creates. It delivers not just traditional effect for our forces, but the cutting edge innovation that we're seeing. And it's a great story that we should tell. As a proud Janner, I know that we show our pride in Plymouth by not showing it, which is very stupid, but it is also how we work in Plymouth. That's a bad business model. We need to change that. Telling the story about this is on the few places on the planet, the cutting edge of marine autonomy. Well, that is seeing massive investment in our region, massive foreign investment, and a real energy around it. Now, we can replicate that type of work all around the country with our different capabilities. If you think about Swindon as the kind of drone hub that we're seeing investing with companies investing in big warehouses, new production and fabrication facilities. If we look at what's happening around Manchester in some of the amazing AI work that's coming out of there, we've got this expertise. And so it's not a brown field that we have to squint our eyes and imagine something being built on it. We've got a success story all around the country. We've ended the hollowing out of our forces. We're increasing defence spending. We're investing in more British firms. Well, we need to tell people and be louder and prouder about it. When every single day you can see bombs landing in Ukraine, you can see the world becoming more uncertain. This isn't just a national security thing. This is a reassurance at home. This is about delivering Britain's historic role of standing tall on the international stage, being there for our friends and allies, and creating good jobs. So if we get this right, everyone wins, and the person who loses is the guy sitting in the Kremlin.
Yeah.
So, Minister, just to summarise our conversation today, I've got 3 very quick questions.
Try me.
The very first one is, in your view, why does defence represent our most strategically important investment right now?
Because all our security, all our economy, every single part of it depends on the security that defence provides. And you only need to look at Ukraine to see what happens when you have a country without that security, thanks to the illegal actions of a neighbour. And I don't want that for Britain or any of our friends.
Since you've taken your role, what is the achievement you are most proud of?
The thing we're most proud of is the way we've shifted some of the investments. So the investment into autonomy as an area. It's a lesson from Ukraine that we've learnt. It's providing a huge boost to regional economies, massive growth and a real excitement about what can be done there. But also, that is how we're going to fight in the future. So let's get after it. And that shift to get there, what John Healey's been doing as Defence Secretary in orchestrating that move, I think has been really powerful, but it's been led by the service chiefs who've really led in on this. They get it. The First Sea Lords, CGS, they get it. And they're doing something really quite incredible. So being part of that team is a real genuine privilege for me.
And finally, Minister, what is one thing that you feel you have not yet achieved, but you are working very hard towards to?
I think it's about culture still. So I'm absolutely convinced that everyone that wears gold braid, 1 stars and above, across the Ministry of Defence, get it. I'm not yet convinced that all the incentives within our system for everyone else has been delivered yet. And I want people to go to work in whatever role they're doing in the MOD and know that their job is to get to warfighting readiness, to contribute to that single mission. If we can get to a point where whatever your paycheck, whatever your position, you are clear about how you can contribute and that you have more agency to change the stuff that's not right, well, that will make Britain safer and better. And it will mean that when people go home to their families at the end of a hard day's work, they can have more pride and more agency in their work. I think that is how we get to warfighting readiness. It's not just having generals saying the right words, it's about having a whole force and an industry that sits behind it that is clear on the mission, clear on the incentives, that are different from what we have today. They're going in the right direction, but more work to do. That's how we keep Britain safe.
Minister, thank you so much for joining us today and for all the incredibly hard work that you do and for having this conversation with us.
Yeah, it's been excellent. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks very much, both.
And thank you very much for listening to this episode of Defence Talk, Securing UK Advantage, brought to you by the Council on Geostrategy in partnership with ADS and sponsored by BE Systems. You can find all our past and upcoming episodes on Britain's World, our online magazine, and on all major podcast platforms.